So, now they are saying that COVID-19 is an airborne respiratory infection. We are in a much worse situation than was previously thought. The 82nd Airborne couldn't kill as many Americans as COVID-19 Airborne will kill. Well, maybe if the 82nd Airborne were dropping nuclear weapons, it could kill as many Americans as COVID-19 Airborne will kill. Between 129,000 to 226,000 Japanese were killed by nuclear weapons at the end of World War II. How many Americans have been killed so far? What is today's death toll? I have included clips from Cindy Farr from the Missoula County Health Department and Dr. John Campbell apparently from somewhere in England discussing the latest developments.
I would also like to talk a little bit about airborne transmission of COVID-19. New studies are indicating that the virus can be transmitted by airborne transmission and not just by droplets or surface contamination. So first, let's talk about the difference between the types of transmission. Transmission by surface contamination is just what it sounds like. The virus gets on your hands, you touch something, you cough on something, and then someone else comes along and touches that object and then touches their face. Then they can contract the virus. Droplet transmission means that the virus is made up of large particles that can only survive on droplets such as saliva or mucus, and airborne transmission means that the virus is made up of much smaller particles and can be transmitted when you're talking or breathing. As you can imagine, if COVID-19 is airborne, that means it is much more contagious than previously thought. There has been suspicion for months that the virus could be airborne, and now there's a growing body of scientific research to support that.
So it's time to address airborne transmission of COVID-19. This is in the Clinical Infectious Diseases Journal published on the 6th of July. Now, it was only written by two main researchers and writers, but it's supported by 239 independent scientists from around the world from different fields. So there's 239 scientists here who have basically put their name to this and saying, well, yeah, we agree with this. So what is it saying? Potential for airborne spread of COVID-19, yes. Airborne spread, and we could say as in paratroopers. We are talking infection in the air here, unlike what Dr. Tedros said in that press conference when he furiously backpedaled. Significant potential for inhalation exposure, yes. Microscopic respiratory droplets called microdroplets. Now these are absolutely tiny. So if this is the size of a red blood cell there, about 7 micrometers in diameter, these droplets are smaller than that. They're about 5 micrometers in diameter. So they're smaller than red blood cells. So these are microscopic droplets. And as such, they can hang in the air for much longer periods of time. Viruses are released during exhalation, talking, coughing in microdroplets. So these come out during these tiny droplets that contain the viral particles, come out with talking, coughing, laughing, singing, all those sort of things. And of course, this is all, I've taken this all directly from this paper. This is not me making anything up. Do check it for yourself. You can get a PDF of it from that website. So viruses are released during exhalation, talking, coughing in microdroplets, small enough to remain aloft in the air. So when you breathe out, there's going to be some bigger droplets and some smaller droplets. Well, the bigger droplets are going to just fall under the influence of gravity fairly quickly, but the smaller ones can remain hanging in the air for hours. This aerosolization effect. So these tiny droplets are this kind of size, about 5 micrometers, and can contain many viral particles suspended within them, just hanging in the air. Small enough to remain aloft, 5 micrometer droplets. And this paper is saying they can travel for tens of meters indoors over time. Now, if they're blown away, they won't, but this is slightly more than the 1 or 2 meters that the World Health Organization has been talking about for 5 or 6 months now. So potentially over time, tens of meters. This is quite a quantum shift in thinking, but it is what we suspected when we looked at the science way back in March. So the paper carries on. Transmission via airborne microdroplets is an important pathway. It is an important modality of infection transmission. Hand washing and social distancing is not knocking that, of course, that has to continue, but it's insufficient. Now, we know that it's safer being 2 meters away from someone than 1 meter away, but this is showing that the virus can stay hanging in the air, in still air or relatively still air environments. Viruses have been shown to survive equally well, if not better, in aerosolized droplets in the air compared to droplets on a surface. Interesting. So it's saying that the virus can survive in the air longer than it can survive on surfaces. And we know that the virus can survive on surfaces in some cases for days. So in still air, these viral particles in these micro droplets can remain suspended in the air for long periods of time. And the virus will be equally viable to larger droplets on the surface, if not more viable. And they believe, the authors of this paper believe, still talking about this paper of course here in the Clinical Infectious Diseases Journal, they believe that looking back, this modality of spread, this form of transmission, can explain several super spreader events. So a super spreader is when one person can infect many other people. Maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe even more. Super spreader events could be explained by this modality of aerosolized spread. And the authors say we must address every potentially important pathway to slow the spread of COVID-19. So this knowledge is important to slow the spread. So what measures are this group of 239 international scientists advocating? Well, again, we have kind of mentioned it on this channel for some weeks, I must say. The measures that should be taken, this is what they're saying. This is the 239 scientists speaking. Provide sufficient and effective ventilation, as we've been saying for some time. Supply clean outdoor air. Minimise recirculating air. And we actually talked about this as a factor way back in the days of that ship in Yokohama, the Diamond Princess, if you remember, way back in February. They're saying particularly in public buildings, workplace environments, schools, hospitals and aged care homes. So where have we had a lot of transmission? Aged care homes, yes. Hospitals, yes. Workplaces, yes. Schools, fortunately, most of them were closed down early enough for this not to happen. So this all makes sense. Supplement general ventilation with airborne infection control, such as local exhaust, so sucking the air out, extractor fans and things like that. High efficiency air filtration, which isn't always present, especially in air conditioning units. And, this is interesting, germicidal ultraviolet lights. So they're saying that ultraviolet light going through the air will go through these aerosolized micro droplets suspended in the air, and we know that ultraviolet light will kill the virus. So again, this all makes perfect sense. It's all to do with the degree of ventilation. Avoid overcrowding, particularly public transport, which is often poorly vented, particularly public buildings which are poorly ventilated. So that is their recommendations. It's all to do with the level of ventilation. So we were talking to a school teacher, for example, recently in Thailand on this channel, and they said the first thing they did was turn off the air conditioning and open all the windows. And we know that Thailand has been relatively successful in preventing wide-scale transmission. And especially in summer, there's no reason not to ventilate things as well as we can. The trouble is, like me, you probably sometimes work in a building which is a modern, sophisticated building and the glass windows don't open. This is part of the problem. Now, when I was a young staff nurse, we worked on wards called Nightingale wards, and these were great big long wards. And every morning after we'd finished tidying all the patients up, we'd clean the patients and give them the washes and breakfasts and make the beds and things like that. And then what we'd do is we'd open all the windows. Even in winter, it was a bit cold, the patients used to complain, but we used to keep them wrapped up. And it was only after the windows had been open for about half an hour, only then would we go on and do the dressings and the aseptic techniques and look after the surgical wounds, when we'd got rid of all the dust and things in the air. And we very, very rarely had wound infections. Now in modern hospitals, there's a lot of hospital-acquired infection because you can no longer ventilate them properly. If I wanted to be cynical, I would use the word progress.
Dr. John Campbell said that the virus can survive for longer periods of time in aerosol than it can on surfaces. The virus can survive for up to 3 days on surfaces. Somewhere I heard that the half-life for COVID-19 in aerosol form was 3 hours. That means that after 3 hours there is half as much virus still in the air as there was originally. It would take an appreciably longer period of time for the next 50% of the aerosolized COVID-19 to precipitate out of the air, let's say at least 6 hours. So, 9 hours after someone with COVID-19 has walked through a room and breathed out aerosolized COVID-19 particles, there is still 25% of the original amount of aerosolized COVID-19 still in the air. The safest time to go into a grocery store is right at the time of the opening of the store. It is very unwise to drink in a bar or eat in a restaurant. Worship with your pastor on Zoom.